hours. I'll be keeping you company here on GBNews TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country and indeed across the world. We have plenty coming up. More on the Rwanda plan, on Archbishop Justin Welby's judgment, the Prime Minister's chances of a bounce back, and the cost of living crisis. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. It's exactly 1 minute past 12. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Archbishop of Canterbury says government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda cannot stand up to the judgment of God. In his Easter sermon at Canterbury Cathedral, Justin Welby said the decision does not match our values as a Christian country. Anyone who arrived in Britain illegally since January 1st could be relocated to Rwanda under the deal. The government says it will help to break people smuggling networks and stem the flow of migrants crossing the channel. Founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Amankona, told GB News he thinks the Archbishop shouldn't involve himself in politics.
Not the first time that the Archbishop has made political interventions. I always think sometimes he is known to overstep the mark politically, I would think. There are certainly people who would agree with his point that this is a moral issue and therefore it's right that the figurehead of a British institution makes a comment on it. But then also there are people who just want the Archbishop to stay out of politics, much like the Queen does.
Boris Johnson has paid tribute to the people of Ukraine in his Easter Sunday address. His comments come as the Ministry of Defence said that Russia's ultimate objective remains the same, despite its shifted operational focus to eastern Ukraine. Yesterday, the Prime Minister was among several senior British politicians banned from entering Russia by the Kremlin. Speaking in Ukrainian, Mr. Johnson urged those in the country to be strong and have courage in your heart.
Those around the world facing fear of persecution, forced to celebrate their saviour's rebirth in secret, and of course, the Christians of Ukraine, whether they're marking Easter today or its Orthodox equivalent later this month, for whom Christ's message of hope, the triumph of life over death and good over evil, will resonate this year perhaps more than any other. Будьте сильны и майте в сердце odvahu. Вisi, что вповайте на Господа.
The Prime Minister. Russia has told the last Ukrainian forces defending Mariupol their lives will be spared if they surrender. Moscow claims the steelworks is now the only area of the city not under its control. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says authorities have asked Russia to open humanitarian corridors today, but an agreement has not been made. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine's defence of the city continues despite Russia's blockade.
The situation is certainly not improving on a daily basis. Our military is blocked, and with them, the wounded people are blocked. There are many dead. Unfortunately, there is a humanitarian catastrophe with a shortage of food, water, and no medications. However, the guys defend heroically. We're grateful to them for that. To be honest, there is no trust in the Russian negotiators about Mariupol.
President Zelensky. Prince Charles says it's profoundly moving to see the number of British people ready to invite Ukrainian refugees into their homes. In his Easter message, the Prince of Wales paid tribute to the 200,000 people who have registered for the government's Home for Ukraine scheme so far. Prince Charles also says he's heartbroken by the suffering experienced by the victims of the conflict who are forced to seek shelter far from home. New allegations are being made over the Prime Minister's conduct in the ongoing Partygate scandal. The Sunday Times claims that Boris Johnson led the celebrations at a leaving do for his former press chief during lockdown. Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, says if the latest reports are true, the Prime Minister's actions are indefensible. Mr Johnson is expected to update MPs when they return to the Commons on Tuesday. Well, the Prime Minister will visit India next week in a bid to boost trade and defence partnerships. Boris Johnson will meet his Indian counterpart, Narendra Modi, in New Delhi to focus on deepening the security partnership between the two countries. He's also expected to use the trip to push forward trade negotiations launched earlier this year. 2 people have died and at least 11 people have been injured after being shot at a party in the US. A warning, the following clip contains flashing images. Authorities in the city of Pittsburgh say the shooting happened shortly after midnight at a rental property where nearly 200 people had gathered for a large party. The city's public safety department says investigations are ongoing. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have commended the bravery of the Ukrainian team during the opening ceremony of the Invictus Games. Speaking at the event, Meghan told the crowd, "Slava Ukraini," meaning glory to Ukraine. The couple then kissed before Harry delivered an emotional speech telling the Ukrainian competitors, "We stand with you." This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. Coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, as you've just heard in Ray's news, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has condemned the government's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, labelling it the opposite of the nature of God. But is the Archbishop right to make this explosive intervention? Plus, Easter favourites like lamb and hot cross buns are more expensive this year as the cost of living continues to rise. We'll speak to a finance expert and the former head of Energy UK about what changes you can make to the way you live and shop to help your bottom line. And it is Easter Sunday, so we'll also be speaking to a very good friend of mine, former journalist, author, and now Anglican priest, George Pitcher, about the place of faith and indeed Christian morals in modern society. Now, there's nothing new in archbishops of Canterbury putting the boot into prime ministers, and indeed, if you go back far enough, to kings as well, criticising policy and personalities. The late Robert Runcie thought that Thatcherism was dangerous and divisive. George Carey thought that Thatcher gave the country backbone, but like the current incumbent, Justin Welby, was very critical on housing policy. But this Easter, Justin Welby has raised the bar, declaring that the government's Rwanda immigration policy is, and I quote, opposite the nature of God. It does not, he says, quotes, carry the weight of our national responsibility as a country formed by Christian values. It's explosive stuff and falls just as Priti Patel claims that the plan to ship asylum seekers to Rwanda could become a model for other countries. Now, 2 or 3 polls suggest that around half of you think it's quite a good idea, though many do want a clearer distinction between those who are fleeing real danger, genuine refugees from conflict zones, and those who are frankly just seeking a better life, so-called economic migrants. If it's part of Boris Johnson's comeback plan, however, what are its chances of success? Home Office staff are said to be opposed because they say it's inhuman. More significantly, however, the top civil servant at the Home Office was unhappy because he couldn't be persuaded it was value for money. Now, that's a concern shared by quite a few on Priti Patel's own political side. But more would say it's just further evidence that the Home Office remains a grumbly, dysfunctional Department of State that's still not fit for purpose. So it could play out either way. And if it is just the first of several policy moves to shore up the Prime Minister and even return him to popularity, that is more worrying. Even his closest supporters say that his troubles are not over yet. We'll be discussing the plan and the Archbishop's intervention and how Boris Johnson's fight back is going. Major moves on the cost of living crisis, not least on energy prices, are also anticipated. More cash perhaps for the most needy come the next price hike in October, even to rowing back on net zero, at least for now. We would love to hear what you think on the Rwanda plan, on Justin Welby's intervention, the Prime Minister's chances of bounce back, and that cost of living crisis. As always, all you have to do is email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We and I are also on Twitter at GBNews, and we are on Facebook. And to get the ball rolling, I'm delighted to be joined now live in the studio by Michael Portillo, the former Defence Secretary, Treasury Minister, and now, of course, a successful broadcaster. And sitting next to him, an old friend of mine, Nigel Nelson, who is Fleet Street's longest-serving political editor from the Mirror Group. Michael, let me start with you. Before we come to Justin, How do you, as a senior Tory who's held very high office, rate the Rwanda plan?
I think it should certainly be tried. There are very difficult political issues here. There are people dying in the Channel. There are criminals who are making a fortune out of it. We would normally be disrupting those criminals, but we can't do that because we don't have access to France. That's where we should be arresting them. That's where we should be destroying their boats. That option is not open to us. So we have a combination of circumstances here where people are dying in the Channel and criminals are getting rich on it. Therefore, something has to be done. What the government is proposing is similar to what has been done successfully in Australia. And when I hear people talking about the value for money problems, the thing is that because Australia introduced this sort of policy, the crossings by boat of migrants came to an end.
Sure.
Overnight, they came to an end. And so how do you put a cost value on that? The fact that suddenly you didn't have to be spending, in the British case, £1.5 billion a year putting migrants up in hotels. The fact that you weren't losing 27 lives at a time. And just straying into the Justin Welby thing, I mean, human life is very important and we need to put a value on human life. And it is terribly surprising to me on Easter Day, when we're talking about the triumph of life over death, that the Archbishop of Canterbury is so convinced that this is a non-godlike policy. This is a policy which is about saving lives and stopping criminality.
Going to come to Welby in just a moment. A slight nuance on it, because I'd like to know what your own view is on the Rwanda plan. But yesterday we were talking to Norman Baker, Edwina Curry, Anne Widdecombe, a range of opinion there, and also John Mann, who used to be a Labour MP and is now sitting in the House of Lords in those colours. And the thing I put to them, and they didn't any of them demur from it, that the sharpest criticism that's coming of the Rwanda plan, before Welby opened his mouth, was coming from people like you, in the Sunday Mirror. It was coming from people like your colleague Pippa Crerar in the Daily Mirror. It's even coming from people like Andrew Mitchell on the Tory benches on cost and stuff like that. Where's the Labour alternative?
Well, I mean, the whole question really is, if you're talking about saving life, there are other ways of doing it without entering into a trade in human cargo, which is what this basically comes down to. So at the moment that asylum seekers have to actually make the application for asylum in this country. So somehow they've got to get here. Yeah. If they come by plane, they still have to lie before they get here about the reasons for coming. So if you were looking for an alternative, we should be finding a way of getting safe routes, as we do with refugees from refugee camps, safe routes for people to come in, which would deter them going across the Channel.
Yeah. But isn't that incumbent upon a party that seeks to replace the current government? Isn't it incumbent upon them to spell that out, as you have done, with great ease? I mean, whether I agree with you or not is utterly irrelevant. But you can articulate it as Baker articulated it yesterday.
Yes, I would like to hear the Labour Party say something on that, a solution to it rather than just a criticism of what it says at the moment.
OK, coming then to Welby and sticking those two excellent thoughts together, the other thing that strikes me is that Priti Patel particularly, but also Boris Johnson to an extent, can dismiss the bulk of the criticism as the usual suspects, either newspapers that intrinsically disagree with the Conservative stance on anything, and that's right and proper, and they're allowed to do that, or lawyers chasing nice big fat fees, or unelected clerics. Usual suspects, putting the boot in.
Well, what is so depressing about the Church of England's interventions over the years is that they're nearly always on the left. I mean, there is a tendency that this begins to look like the Labour Party in robes. If there were going to be frequent interventions, it would be interesting if some of them could be characterised as being from the right and some from the left, but that is not the case. Where it's kind of unfair is that the Archbishop weighs in and decrees what is godlike and what is ungodlike, but he doesn't engage with the political issue, which is what politicians have to do. Politicians can't just say, or maybe the Labour Party is at the moment just saying, we don't want anything to do with this. Politicians have to solve problems. And I think if an archbishop is going to make an intervention, then he ought to do that in the same spirit. So what the government is saying is, yes, we have a desperate problem here, and people are dying. The policy that we're seeking to introduce is a very tough one. And yes, I think there will be some humour and suffering, although actually what I think will happen is that the trade will dry up overnight. So I don't think we're going to find lots of people being transported to Rwanda, because the whole business model of the criminals collapses if the people can't set foot and stay in Britain, which is where they're wanting to come to. And it's such an obvious point, and I'm sorry to repeat it because it is so obvious, but these people are actually coming here from France. They're not coming here from Syria. They're no longer in Syria, if they ever were. I do agree with you, Nigel. We've seen how Britain reacts to the Ukrainian refugees. Let us, by all means, react to other refugees in the same way, to Syrians and so on. But the people who have gathered at Calais may or may not be political refugees. What is absolutely certain about them is that they're not in any danger in France.
No, they're not in danger in France. But I mean, we now have the problem of Brexit. We used to have the Dublin regulation, which said that asylum seekers should claim asylum in the first safe country they come to. Since Brexit, we've lost the Dublin regulation, so we're stuck with a situation where they're trying to get over here. And although you sort of cite Australia, Michael, as being a great success, yes, it did actually stop boat crossings, but they still had real problems with human rights in Papua New Guinea. They had to close down the camp there. They had to pay £37 million in compensation because of ill treatment there. All the worries that we face about Rwanda. And when it comes to the Archbishop of Canterbury, he's the one person in Britain who I think has got the right to interpret what God's will happens to be. And the other point there is the Archbishop of Canterbury is in a sense a politician. That he's leader of the established church, which 26 bishops are parliamentarians. They are legislators as of right. Whether that's right or wrong is a different argument, but that's what they are. And what they should be doing is intervening in British politics an awful lot more than they do at the moment. The problem with the Church of England is it doesn't seem to be relevant. It lags 30 years behind the people it purports to represent. I love it when the Archbishop will actually take the bull by the horns and deal with it with a current controversy.
But that's fascinating because it raises that it is incumbent upon men and women of the cloth to speak out in that territory because that's what they do for a living. But in a sense, your earlier observation was that there is a moral response to it, and it's saving lives in the Channel. It's saving lives stuck in refrigerated lorries with the refrigeration turned off.
Yeah, that is the moral issue. And the Archbishop, it seems to me, is not engaged with it. He's not said, I have considered the fact that people are dying in the Channel and dying in lorries. And I believe that even though these people are dead, and even though more people are going to die, and even though this is a criminal activity, I think that it's better to have what we've got than to send a few people to Rwanda. Now, I mean,
do you share Nigel's concern, and many other people have raised it, about Rwanda? I know they tried many other countries, but Rwanda is the country with whom they are doing a deal. The US State Department latest report on Rwanda was utterly damning, as indeed was one that the Foreign Office here signed off as well, on civil liberties, on gay rights, all sorts of things.
Well, these people are being sent to Rwanda to be processed. And I repeat my point, which is I think that most people will not choose to make the journey. That is actually the point of the policy. The point of the policy is not to send a whole lot of people to Rwanda. It is to choke off the criminal trade, which is what happened in the Australian case. I would like to address Nigel's point.
Yeah.
If mistakes were made in the case of the way Australia implemented its policy, then that's good for us because there are things that we can learn about. And I certainly don't say that there are no issues with this, that there are no problems. I think there are, and some of them will be debated in Parliament and some of them will be taken through the courts. But we're still left with the position where the Archbishop of Canterbury seems to be saying that it's worse to, as it were, threaten, because I think it is basically a threat rather than what's going to be an actuality, threaten to take people to Rwanda. Worse to do that than to allow people to die in the Channel. I don't see how that is, a godlike position.
No, but you're assuming then that the people traffickers will actually be put off.
I am.
The danger is they'll change their business model.
Which is what they did when Israel did a similar deal with Rwanda back in, when was it, 2017, 2016?
And Israel ran into a lot of legal problems with doing that.
Turned the tap off in the end. Didn't work.
Yes, I mean, Israel certainly didn't proceed as we're intending to proceed.
No.
They proceeded in a great deal of secrecy and obfuscation. The British government is going to take this through Parliament. It's going to be very transparent. We obviously have courts where the British government can be challenged. I mean, there is I can see a fault in the bridge system, which is that we're not going to put children through this process. So I can immediately see that the people smugglers will switch to children.
That would be one way of getting around it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a problem. I mean, the government is trying to make the package more palatable by not including children, but that is an obvious possible fault with it. But I think in the case of Australia, I don't think they have been able to change the business model. And by the way, all parties in Australia now agree to the policy. There isn't, as far as I know, political opposition, at least within the main two parties in Australia, to the policy. It is now a bipartisan policy. And I can see that happening here as well.
Yeah.
They had to close down the camps in New Guinea. So the Australian policy didn't necessarily work. And so the question is, yes, if we can learn from the mistakes of Australia, brilliant. What if we're just repeating them?
Yeah.
The feeling at the moment is that's what's going on.
You're both very experienced political practitioners and political observers over a period of time. The other thing that strikes me about this, and I mentioned it almost as a throwaway line in my introduction, that I think there have been two major national opinion polls, and Christopher Hope did one for his own podcast with the Daily Telegraph. And OK, that's the Telegraph, and that's a perfectly reasonable criticism, although Hope's a very straight journalist as well. But the two big ones, Savanta and YouGov, find that around about 45-50% of the great British public, who ultimately are the only people who matter in all of these debates, think it's worth giving it a try.
Yeah, I'd have thought it'd been higher. If only half the people actually agree with it, that sounds like half don't. So I'm not sure that this is actually going to be the great popular policy that Boris Johnson and Priti Patel were hoping. I mean, quite clearly, the timing of it is to hit the local elections, to try and ameliorate the damage from Partygate. But at the moment, the opinion polls, I would have thought it would be a populist policy. That's what they're expecting.
All right. You've both agreed kindly to stay with us and come back for a more detailed conversation at 1 o'clock about Boris Johnson. But let me end on this. If you were Boris Johnson waking up at the moment and looking at the newspapers, would you look to yourself and think, do you know what, I'd rather have Zelensky as a mate than Justin Welby as a mate?
Yes.
That's what we're going to talk about a lot at 1 o'clock, but that's a key factor.
So one sentence, I think the relationship with Zelensky has done Boris a lot of good, has put Boris in a very good light, and yes, is part of his recovery plan.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, we'll talk about that and more at 1 o'clock. For the time being, though, Nigel and Michael, thank you both very, very much indeed. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We have lots more coming up on the programme, including a look at how the cost of living crisis might be affecting your favourite Easter goodies and what you can do about it. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather this Easter.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for much of the country, but rain will continue in the far west. Let's take a look at the details. Across southwest England, most places will remain dry this afternoon, though rain will move into western Cornwall, feeling warm in the sun with highs of 16 Celsius, 61 Fahrenheit. The sunshine will turn increasingly hazy for southeast England, but it will be dry and warm with light southerly winds, temperatures reaching 18 degrees. Turning cloudy for Western Wales with a few splashes of rain possible. Dry and bright elsewhere with some sunshine. Temperatures will reach 17 Celsius. The Midlands will stay dry with plenty of sunshine, and also northwest England too. The sun may become hazy later, but temperatures will approach 20 Celsius, well above average for the time of year. Northeast England will also be dry and warm with lots of hazy sunshine. However, it will be a little bit fresher along the coast with temperatures lower here compared to inland areas. Outbreaks of patchy rain will affect the Western Isles and parts of the Highlands through this afternoon, but elsewhere across Scotland there'll be plenty of dry, bright and warm weather. Northern Ireland will stay cloudy this afternoon with further outbreaks of rain, the rain turning heavy at times too, feeling fresher across the country with temperatures in low double figures. Rain will remain across the far west this evening, whilst the rest of the UK will be fine and dry. That's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events. And I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. It's 27 minutes past 12. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. We've been discussing up to this point what the Archbishop of Canterbury was poised to say in his Easter address. It's all over any of the newspapers that you may be kind enough to buy or scan or see online, or listen to those of us plying our trade on TV and radio. But we're going to carry on the conversation in just a moment. But here for your edification is the Archbishop of Canterbury uttering his immortal words.
And this season is also why there are such serious ethical questions about sending asylum seekers overseas. The details are for politics and politicians. The principle must stand the judgment of God, and it cannot. It cannot carry the weight of resurrection justice, of life conquering death. It cannot carry the weight of the resurrection that was announced first to the least valued, for it privileges the rich and the strong. And it cannot carry the weight of our national responsibility as a country formed by Christian values, because subcontracting out our responsibilities even to a country that seeks to do well like Rwanda is the opposite of the nature of God, who himself took responsibility for our failures on the cross.
There's a lot more in that address, and it is available on the Archbishop's own website and that of the Archbishopric of Canterbury. And it really is worth reading. It's provocative. I asked you to hang on because we've had some fairly lively emails and tweets from folk already, but I also wanted you to hear as well as read. Ivan comes in and says, Rwanda's a great idea. Welby is naive and Boris is Teflon. Those 2 points bolted together. I'm not sure that Welby is naive, but perhaps that plays to something that both of you are saying, and that is know your territory before you wade into it.
I had not seen the clip of him saying it, and
ours is but to serve, Michael.
I think the second sentence was very interesting. He said the details are for politicians. What a cop-out. I mean, you can't get into politics without getting into the policy options. And, you know, he's saying he won't accept this policy option, so are they to go on dying in the Channel? That's what's not addressed.
Saying that God won't accept it, which is the point. So that's his job in his Easter message, to actually talk about God.
But the implication,
solve the crisis.
The implication then is that God will accept 27 people going down on a raft and will accept 39 people in the back of a trailer who are suffering.
Only if you're right about it being a deterrent.
Fascinating. Jake comes to us via Twitter. Rwanda, yes please. Justin Welby's comments are irrelevant. That's Jake's chosen word. The Prime Minister should go, which we're going to talk about at 1 o'clock, but who replaces him is a bigger question. The cost of living crisis is artificial, brought on by profiteering gas suppliers. Paul on Twitter, I'm looking forward to listening to the opinions of your guests on the comments of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Is it welcome or is it an unwarranted intervention without alternative? I should have read that one out before you said what you just said. You, in your earlier contribution, made the point about the fact, and I said he sits in the House of Lords, he does actually have a say and a vote in our legislative process. When I said on Twitter that we were going to be discussing this, an awful lot of people came on board and said, that's wrong. It's actually wrong that senior clerics, only from the Anglican Church, sit in the House of Lords unless they're given a life peerage, like the former chief rabbi and people like that. There is a point of constitutional principle here as well. Abuse of office, you might even argue.
Yeah, there is. And the whole point is that it's the fact that we have bishops sitting in the House of Lords as of right. I think we're the only country outside Iran that actually allows clerics to do that. Because we have that, that's the reason the House of Lords reform has always been put back and put back. The biggest danger is if you pluck the bishops out of the House of Lords, the church might disestablish. That then threatens the monarchy because it is a key plank of the monarch to be the head of the church.
Absolutely. And our old mutual friend, Tony Benn, that was at the heart of his argument.
I was hearing Tony Benn as no,
absolutely.
I remember Tony Benn, when I was about 24 years old, Tony Benn took me through the whole argument about the... this was when actually the Prince of Wales was thinking of marrying a Catholic.
Yes.
And Tony Benn suddenly went off and said, this is marvellous, because this means the disestablishment of the church, this means the bishop come out of the House of Lords, that means the end of the House of Lords. What I would say is this is not a day for bishop bashing for me. The House of Lords is an appalling mess. And the fact that the bishops are there is only one part of a real can of worms.
Hereditary should go, not elected one every now and then. Life should go. Well, I mean, I personally, I'm very uncomfortable as a pounding Democrat to think that somebody who just does somebody a favour, or to be brutal, bungs a donation in someone's direction, can end up having a vote on the law of the land that we all do our best to obey.
And the terrible has-beens from the House of Commons. I mean, it's just... No, seriously, it's really awful, the House of Lords. And there are more than 1,000 of them. I think there are more than 1,000. It's simply an appalling mess.
Yeah, but the trouble about it is if the three of us went off to go and set up a new political system in an emerging country, the House of Lords would not be part of it, quite clearly.
Elected Senate.
However, this is not the case in this country. Our political system has gradually evolved. And if you start taking bricks out of the British Constitution, the danger is the edifice will fall down. And getting rid of the House of Lords or making it wholly elected would have unintended consequences that obviously Tony Benn was talking about some years back.
He is the most wonderful Conservative. No, seriously, that is the most beautiful Conservative argument for why we should keep things as they are. It has been a privilege to hear you today.
This is the only programme on British broadcasting where you can hear Michael Portillo, a senior Tory, praise Nigel Nelson, the editor of the broadly Labour-supporting Mirror group of newspapers, as a Conservative, but also singing the praises of our mutual friend Tony Benn. Final one, before I get shouted at in my ear, which is though he does brilliantly, but it's a cracker, and it's from Brenda, and it came, not that Brenda, another Brenda, and it comes via email. Why doesn't the Archbishop open up the churches that don't get used anymore and provide sleeping bags and soup kitchens for people who have arrived, whether it's from Ukraine?
Good idea, absolutely.
Stop criticising whatever the government proposes, says Brenda.
Well, and it's not only that the church is there to receive immigrants, it's that they are empty. Because, we're all judged a little bit by our public and by the goods that we're selling. And I'm afraid the Archbishop presides over ever emptier Church of England churches.
Michael Portillo and Nigel Nelson, thank you both very much indeed. This time I say it with accuracy. You will come back at 1 o'clock and we will talk more about Boris Johnson and the recovery. But for the time being, thanks for listening to those observations from our wonderful viewers. And you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we have plenty more still to come this afternoon, including a look at how that cost of living crisis might be affecting your favourite Easter goodies and what you might be able to do about it. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the news. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. It's exactly 35 minutes past 12. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Archbishop of Canterbury says government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda cannot stand up to the judgment of God. In his Easter sermon at Canterbury Cathedral, Justin Welby says the decision does not match our values as a Christian country. However, Home Secretary Priti Patel says other countries will follow the UK's blueprint. Boris Johnson has paid tribute to Christians in Ukraine during his Easter Sunday address. His comments come as the Ministry of Defence said that Russia's ultimate objective remains the same, despite its shifted operational focus to eastern Ukraine. Speaking in Ukrainian, Mr. Johnson urged those in the country to be strong and have courage in your heart.
Those around the world facing fear of persecution, forced to celebrate their Saviour's rebirth in secret, and of course, the Christians of Ukraine, whether they're marking Easter today or its Orthodox equivalent later this month, for whom Christ's message of hope, the triumph of life over death and good over evil, will resonate this year perhaps more than any other. Будьте сильны и майте в сердце odvahu. Вisi, что вовайте на Господа.
A warning, the following clip does contain flashing images. 2 people have died and at least 11 have been injured after being shot at a party in the United States. Authorities in the city of Pittsburgh say the shooting happened shortly after midnight at a rental property where nearly 200 people had gathered for a large party. The city's public safety department says that investigations are ongoing. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Coming up today at 6 p.m.
Welcome to a very special GB News Easter programme. We are invited during this short time to enter into the passion, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's an invitation to take part in the most important part of the Christian life. Happy Easter. Alleluia.
The meaning of Easter with Calvin Robinson today at 6 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 20 to 1 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Now, many of you may have felt the pinch as you purchased your Easter meal this year as the cost of living continues to soar. In the 12 months to March this year, food prices have increased 5.9%. To break all of this down and to explain more and perhaps give you a few tips, I am delighted to be joined by my friend and good friend of this programme as well, Jasmine Birtles, the personal finance expert and founder of her website, Money Magpie. Good to see you. What impact specifically, I've given that general headline number of 5.9%, but what impact has the cost of living crisis had on the pocket of British households when it comes to hosting a family get-together at Easter?
Yeah, it is tough. We have seen food prices increase, just as we've seen energy and, of course, petrol increase. However, I do think that we are going to see more food price increases going forward this year. Talking to farmers, and I know, Alistair, you're very much plugged into the farming community. I'm hearing from a lot of farmers that they are concerned about food production, about food security, as we're calling it, later on this year. So in a way, I would say to people, make the most of it right now. Make the most of what you've got, even though prices certainly have gone up, as you say, up by 5.9% in the 12 months to March.
And it's interesting to note, isn't it? I know that lamb is on the list, and obviously that is something that many farmers are wrestling with right now. But also a little bit of lateral thinking here. Hot cross buns, which I absolutely adore, and obviously involve flour in their manufacturing. Flour is about Ukraine, it's about the war, and that's about rising prices. It's not just bread, it's also things like buns.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm also a huge fan of hot cross buns, have them all through the year if I possibly can. But yes, the hot cross buns themselves, as you say, flour is now more expensive. We're looking at the rising cost of bread. That's up, but those are up by 5.2%. And then butter, again, I'm a huge fan of butter, and this is a problem for me. That's up 12%. And we are potentially, I think, looking at higher prices for eggs going forward. One farmer said to me that he thinks that he may have to kill his chickens when it comes to the summer, because he won't be able to feed them. So eggs as well. I think dairy will be impacted by this, as well as other products.
Well, and also with the avian flu thing still dribbling on and has just got much more serious in the United States of America as well. That's a problem for the industrial scale egg producers. Butter, I genuinely didn't know about that rise in butter. Is that related to the cost of dairy farming or is it supply demand?
Good point. I think it is, well, it's a bit of both. So much of this, as you know, so much of the inflation that we're dealing with at the moment, both in food and in other areas, is because of supply chain problems, supply and demand, as you say. I think what we do have to come, honestly, is the inflation the real inflation that comes from quantitative easing, the money printing that's been going on. But just at the moment, we are particularly being hit by supply chain issues. And of course, as you say, the war. I mean, this has brought into really stark reality for us exactly where our basics come from. The fact that Ukraine, Russia produces so much of the wheat that we use, which of course goes into pasta, it goes into bread and everything. And also the potash, that which creates is a fundamental element of fertilizer, and then fertilizer covers everything, and as you well know with your farm.
Well, we've just cancelled fertilising this spring on the advice of the guy who does it for us. It's simply too expensive. I'm just going to interrupt for a few seconds. Jasmine knows exactly what she's talking about and is absolutely brilliant, but she used the expression there, quantitative easing, in case you're choking on your hot cross bun. Quantitative easing is the government and Bank of England producing lots more money, cash, actual cash, to try and boost the economy. And the inflationary problem is the old thing you'll find in any economics textbook: too much money chasing too few goods. And that's one of the key causes of inflation. I knew what she was talking about, but just in case you didn't, I hope I wasn't being condescending, but I thought I'd just explain that. I said in my introduction that you and I know each other well, and you know this programme well because of magpie.com and the interaction that you have with folk who are wrestling with all of these problems. Have they come up with specific ideas, what they would like done to try and help them through this cost of living crisis?
Well, good point. Yeah, I mean, interestingly, one thing that we're doing at Money Magpie is that we're actually going to be running a campaign to get the government to pay our bills, because the energy bills that we've had so far have been so extreme, so huge, and it's not been our fault that they've been so huge. And we are saying now, the average bill for the average household in this country is £2,000. There are 27.8 million households. So it would cost about 54 billion for the government to pay our energy bills. So we're saying the government should this year either pay the whole of our bills or even just half. That's something we think is a reasonable thing to ask, honestly. Given that, I mean, 54 billion sounds like a lot, but it was 57 billion to open up RBS, to bail them out. 57 billion pounds was paid by the government then to bail out RBS Bank. Now, I think it's an entirely reasonable thing to ask for 54 billion, or even, as I say, half of that, to look after the people's energy bills this year.
The only thing I would say, and you know, because you've heard me say it before, that if that policy were to be adopted, and I fear you know that I don't think it would be, but let's be clear with folk listening to the conversation, that would still mean that ultimately they've got to pay for it, because if the government pays for it, as Margaret Thatcher famously said, the government doesn't have any money, it only has taxpayers' revenue and borrowing. Ultimately, you've still got to pay the bill. But last time you were on, we talked... and it was an intriguing conversation because it ranged from allotments to growing your own vegetable and stuff like this. I tell you where I think the government are really failing, and that is getting the message out there about what we can do to help ourselves, whether it's on the consumption of energy and electricity or whether it is recycling food, not wasting so much. And there's an awful lot of money that can be saved there. Shouldn't the government be taking a bit more of an educational lead in that?
Well, yes, in a sense. The problem, I think, always is that you have different people at different stages. So you certainly have people who absolutely could be saving a lot more than they are. There's a lot of wastage. We waste billions of tons of food every year, good food that could be used, which, by the way, is why another campaign that I'm running is a freeganism, to make freeganism legal. And I'll talk about that if you'd like. But on the other hand, we have millions, literally millions of households that are already struggling, already on the breadline. And what happens quite often when the government says, oh, you should all do this and you should all do that, is people go, well, that's patronising. Look at these people who are already struggling horrendously. So if they can find a way, and governments, as you know, usually don't find a way to say this in a way that is acceptable to the electorate, then great. And one thing that they could do potentially is, as well as giving the advice, is to give the enablement, if you like. So, for example, to create more community fridges, for example, to do what I'm trying to campaign to do, to legalise freeganism, to enable supermarkets and food shops generally to literally give food away at the end of the day, and make it something that is legal to do. So if they could do both at the same time.
But if you go into a supermarket or even a convenience store, we've got a brilliant convenience store in the next village that by about 5 o'clock of an evening will then start marking the prices of stuff down because it's fresh food and they haven't sold it that day, but you can still freeze it or you can cook it, turn it into something and then freeze that. I mean, they did that already. You said to make it legal. Why is it illegal? If they want to do that, why don't they do it?
No, it's if they want to give it away for free.
Right, OK.
So, yes, there are problems there with, people coming back to the supermarket saying, I've got food poisoning, because of the food that you gave me for free,
Yes,
so
I do take that point. Final point, and it actually ties together those last two bits that we talked about that I hope folk listening and watching would have found useful. It struck me the other day, talking to my wife about domestic budgets and how we shop and how we try and be aware of the fact that our energy bills also just gone up by about 37%. She said we are beginning to change the way that we shop. We are becoming smarter as shoppers, and we are looking for bargains, and even the way that we shop. So fruit and veg, farmers markets, things like that. We are becoming smarter consumers, and that way, huge savings lie.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. And many of those households that I mentioned that have been on the breadline for a while, they have got used to now going to different supermarkets for different things. They will be using online apps and websites. For example, there's a very good app called Olio and a very good app called Too Good To Go, which put you in touch with cheap food in your area. So people are doing that. What I would like to see is more of us growing our own, frankly, producing our own, so that we give ourselves more food security if we possibly can. Believe me, if I had a garden, I would. I've only got a patio, so it's a bit difficult there. But you know, if I had any sort of garden, it would be already turned into fruit and veg, frankly.
Absolutely. And final point, because we're going to talk to Angela Knight next, but it's interesting, in the Mail, there's a big survey that's been done about all of this, and it says that 46%, damn near half, of us have cut back on our electricity use, and 45% specifically have turned the lights off. It may sound like a tedious shout from mum or granny or whoever it might be, but that does count.
It does, absolutely. I hear my dad in my head saying, switch the lights off. It's not Blackpool Illuminations here, you know.
Jasmine, always a pleasure. Keep in touch and good luck with the allotment. I hope you get up the list. And meantime, radishes in grow bags. Good to see you. Thank you very much. That's Jasmine Birtles there, personal finance expert and founder of the website Money Magpie. Well worth having a look. As I said towards the end of that conversation, delighted now to broaden out the discussion about the cost of living, but to focus in as well specifically on energy. We've been listening there to Jasmine about grocery shopping and getting more expensive, but energy prices have been the real bugbear of it all. And in that same poll that I referred to that is in the Daily Mail, cost of living is the major concern for 69% of people, and specifically the cost of energy. To delve into that and more, I'm delighted to be joined now by Angela Knight, former CEO of Energy UK and a former Member of Parliament, and significantly a former Treasury Minister as well. Angela, always a joy to see you, and thank you very much for joining us this Sunday afternoon. Many are saying that they simply cannot afford to cope with electricity bills, and those that think a little more deeply about it say, as a country, we can no longer afford net zero. Do you believe that net zero is on the way out?
No, I don't. But I think right now there are other things that are priority. And when you think that net zero, we're looking at 2050. So the very fact that we might take a bit of a breather for 2 or 3 years whilst we get some of the things sorted out with our economy and our energy, I don't think is going to deflect us from net zero. But I do think that we really, I suppose I'm going to say, stop talking about it quite so much, because it doesn't have a resonance other than the ones that you have rightly said, and that is, oh, it's going to cost me money. I'm going to have to spend more on electricity now and gas to now, which maybe I can't afford, in order for net zero by 2050. It hasn't got the right resonance at all. And so where I think the government, where I think the Prime Minister needs to focus is very much on today's issues, which you've just been talking about earlier, which is cost of living. And as part of the today's issues, he needs to address actually the other part of the equation, which I think is vitally important, and that is our energy security, the jobs that can be created by building more, for example, small-scale nuclear reactors, and also something about the jobs that can be created by bringing some of those long supply chains, which we have been accustomed to, back on shore. After all, if you just go back, a year when we were all testing ourselves all the time for COVID, the one question that really seemed to stand out in so many people's minds when they looked at the test kit was that it came from China. Yeah. Where did COVID come? It came from China. as we have got a big bioscience industry in this country, and one of the good things that has happened is on the back of that tremendous effort to create vaccines. So some money has been put into actually, the drugs behind it. So we need to think about that type of model, I think, bringing some of that supply chain back locally, building more here in the UK, creating the jobs and doing something about costs, energy, securities. Put that as a piece together.
Totally agree with that, and how marvellous it is. You mentioned the vaccines, that something that was not commonplace when you and I first began to know each other in journalism and in politics, and that is how our great universities, whether it's Oxford or Warwick or wherever, come together with industry, whether it's vaccines or whatever, come up with great ideas, create little companies that the undergraduates and postgraduates can own between themselves as well, and get this stuff done.
Absolutely. And I think that where government's role is in all this is bringing the right sort of groups together, acting as the catalyst, and then putting in at least whatever is the critical piece of investment, whether it is in a building, whether it is in infrastructure, whether it is helping in other ways. Different groups, different industries require different things. And if we look at that then in the context of some of the points that have been made, I always hammer on about energy, and I will continue to hammer on about energy and the importance of getting that nuclear power station back up here. And can I just say it once more? If we go for those small-scale nuclear power stations, the cost of them is whatever, 1/10 of the big ones. You can attract in private sector money. You don't just have to do it off the public balance sheet of either us or France or wherever, and you can do it quicker. That, to my mind, gives an example of how bringing together the various groups in that particular energy context creates the jobs and gets us where we need.
Sure.
Put that into play in pharmaceuticals, in chemicals, indeed in some of the agro areas. And that is, to my mind, the package that means something to us as people right now. Actually does have a green element to it, but has a lot more practicality about it than something called net zero, which is 30 odd years away.
I heard that at the beginning. I hear it again, and I take that point. In fact, it's the first time you and I have chatted since Boris Johnson published the energy strategy, and you've made clear reference a couple of times there to the mini nukes, and I think Rolls-Royce, great British company, are there at the head of the list saying we're ready to go, we've got blueprints, the rest of it. One of the quite potent criticisms I heard, and it's not just silly knocking copy, was that on things like solar panels, we are actually in quite a good place now. Cost of solar panels have come down about 80% over the last decade. Did it surprise you that there wasn't more of a push on solar panels? It was predominantly about nukes and about wind power.
Yes, it was. And no, it didn't particularly surprise me. Two reasons for that. The first is that much as we're all having a lovely Easter, we don't live in a terribly sunny country. We live in a windy country, but we don't live in a terribly sunny country. And then the second thing is it's all about the grid. You see, when we built the national grid, we built it to connect up our power stations because we sit on a coalfield, therefore the power stations are on the coalfield. And then we spread out the grid in order to pick up from the nuclear power stations, which we built in a number of places round the coast. As we built the wind farms, so again, we've had to alter the grid to pick up the wind farm. So if you now say, right, we're now going to connect onto the grid, 30,000, 2 million, 5 million households? Well, you can do it, but our grid was never built for that. And there's a lot of work, like everything, they call it a smart this and a smart that these days, never quite know what it means. So they call it a smart grid, i.e. what you've got to do is you've got to replace an awful lot of the grid. So it's got all those connections, and the electricity can feed back into it as well as come out of it. So it's actually rather more complicated than it sounds.
I completely accept that.
The piece where I would like Boris Johnson to go next on energy is his white paper was all about supply. Have we got enough, and where do we get it from, and how can we bring it more local? Absolutely right. Now we're on the demand side, and you've already been talking, switch the lights off, which my dad used to say. I used to say to me, and if you're cold, put on a cardigan. But I do accept that I'm an oldie. We've moved on a bit. from that. But the boring word insulation is a fantastically important word when it comes to, can I keep my home warm at a reasonable price? And then we need to just turn around and push again on insulation. There are schemes running, and they are good ones. But I kind of wonder if we cannot, again, put together that combination of local councils, of government, of insulation companies, and no doubt there's some others, to get what is often the housing association and council housing build of the 60s and the 70s much better insulated, because that then targets the poorer end of society for whom energy bills are the highest percentage of their income. And
Great
for
food
us,
for thought.
Alistair,
Angela, I'm going to have to draw a line because we're at the top of the hour, but always a pleasure to talk to you. No, fine. And welcome back anytime. We'll carry on the conversation on another occasion. For the time being, former boss of Energy UK and former Treasury Minister Angela, thank you very much indeed and have a lovely afternoon. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. It is 1 minute past 1. We have plenty more still to come in our final hour, so do please stay with us.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. It is 3 minutes past 1. I'm Alastair Stewart and we're into the last hour of our programme. I'll be keeping you company here on TV and radio until 2 o'clock. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the latest news. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. Yes, I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Archbishop of York has joined the Archbishop of Canterbury in criticising the government's plans to send migrants to Rwanda. In his Easter sermon at York Minster, Stephen Cottrell said he found the deal depressing and distressing. Anyone who arrived in Britain illegally since January 1st could be relocated to Rwanda under the deal. The government says it will help to break people smuggling networks and stem the flow of migrants crossing the Channel. Earlier at Canterbury Cathedral, Justin Welby said the plans are the opposite of the nature of God.
And this season is also why there are such serious ethical questions about sending asylum seekers overseas. The details are for politics and politicians. The principle must stand the judgment of God, and it cannot.
Well, founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Amankona, told GB News he thinks the Archbishop shouldn't involve himself in politics.
Not the first time that the Archbishop has made political interventions. I always think sometimes he is known to overstep the mark politically, I would think. There are certainly people who would agree with his point that this is a moral issue and therefore it's right that the figurehead of a British institution makes a comment on it. But then also there are people who just want the Archbishop to stay out of politics, much like the Queen does.
Boris Johnson has paid tribute to the people of Ukraine in his Easter Sunday address. His comments come as the Ministry of Defence said that Russia's ultimate objective remains the same, despite its shifted operational focus to eastern Ukraine. Yesterday, the Prime Minister was among several senior British politicians banned from entering Russia by the Kremlin. Speaking in Ukrainian, Mr. Johnson urged those in the country to be strong and have courage in your heart.
Those around the world facing fear of persecution, forced to celebrate their Saviour's rebirth in secret, and of course, the Christians of Ukraine, whether they're marking Easter today or its Orthodox equivalent later this month, for whom Christ's message of hope, the triumph of life over death and good over evil, will resonate this year perhaps more than any other. Будьте сильні і майте в серці odvahu. Всі, хто вповається на Господа.
Russia has told the last Ukrainian forces defending Mariupol their lives will be spared if they surrender. Moscow claims the steelworks is now the only area of the city not under its control. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine's defense of the city continues despite Russia's blockade.
The situation is certainly not improving on a daily basis. Our military is blocked, and with them, the wounded people are blocked. There are many dead. Unfortunately, there is a humanitarian catastrophe with shortage of food, water, and no medications. However, the guys defend heroically. We're grateful to them for that. To be honest, there is no trust in the Russian negotiators about Mariupol.
Prince Charles says it's profoundly moving to see the number of British people ready to invite Ukrainian refugees into their homes. In his Easter message, the Prince of Wales paid tribute to the 200,000 people who have registered for the government's Homes for Ukraine scheme so far. Prince Charles also says he's been heartbroken by the suffering experienced by the victims of conflict who are forced to seek shelter far from home. Fresh allegations are being made over the Prime Minister's conduct in the ongoing Partygate scandal. The Sunday Times claims Boris Johnson led the celebrations at a leaving do for his former press chief during lockdown. Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, says if the latest reports are true, the Prime Minister's actions are indefensible. Mr Johnson is expected to update MPs when they return to the Commons on Tuesday. 2 people have died and at least 11 have been injured after being shot at a party in the United States. Now a warning, the following clip contains flashing images. Authorities in the city of Pittsburgh say the shooting happened shortly after midnight at a rental property where nearly 200 people had gathered for a large party. The city's public safety department says investigations are now ongoing. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have commended the bravery of the Ukrainian team during the opening ceremony of the Invictus Games. Speaking at the event, Meghan told the crowd, "Slava Ukraini," meaning glory to Ukraine. The couple then kissed before Harry delivered an emotional speech telling the Ukrainian competitors, "We stand with you." This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
9 minutes past 1, coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, we'll be speaking to a spokesperson from the Rwanda government after the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, condemned the government's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, labelling it the opposite of the nature of God. Plus, the Prime Minister's been hammered by a series of scandals in recent months, from MP sleaze to Partygate, as you just heard in Ray's News, Rishi Sunak's tax situation, and now the cost of living crisis, as we were talking before the top of the hour. But he's still standing. So are we witnessing a Boris bounce back? And what might it take to make it lasting? I'll be discussing that with my panel who are back in on the sofa. And it's Easter Sunday, so I'll be speaking to a journalist, author, and now Anglican priest, George Pitcher, good friend of mine, about the place of faith and Christian morals in modern society. So Justin Welby has taken aim at the government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Comes as Priti Patel claims that the plan to ship asylum seekers to Rwanda could become a model for other countries. The polls suggest that many of you think it might be a good idea, 50-50, as Nigel pointed out earlier on before the break. But is it all a part of policy moves to shore up the Prime Minister and even return him to popularity? We'd love to hear what you think on the Rwanda plan, Justin Welby's judgment, and indeed the Prime Minister's chances of a durable bounce back. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We and I are also on Twitter. The GB News Twitter account is @GBNews and mine is mine. We're also on Facebook. And I am delighted to say, as advertised, back in the studio with me, Michael Portillo, former Defence Secretary, Treasury Minister, and now successful broadcaster, and Nigel Nelson, Fleet Street's longest-serving political editor from the Mirror Group of newspapers. Good of you to come back, and thank you. I'm going to draw a line under Rwanda because I think we did it proud and Welby earlier on. But I'm going to start by picking this up, and it was in Ray's news bulletin there about the story that's running in the Sunday Times about fresh allegations there. But this, if we can just get a shot of that one on my camera there, is from the Observer newspaper. Can you see that there? And if you're sitting at home listening on radio rather than watching us on television, it says Focus. Partygate, MP sleaze, cost of living, Sunak, war, energy, tax rise, Brexit, asylum. It's one thing after another. Doesn't even put cost of living at the top. That's what everybody is concerned about.
Yes, I mean that's going to be the big thing. And so where Boris Johnson goes next, I think, will be become much clearer after May the 5th and local elections. That's when you'll get the voters' verdict. It should be about local issues, I know, but of course national issues come into it. So you will then get the verdict about just how angry they are about Partygate, and particularly about not addressing the cost of living crisis.
Yeah. Could more be done? The spring statement from Rishi Sunak was torn apart in some quarters. There is the war chest. Some say it's 50 billion, some say it's as much as 80 billion, and more will come in October. But as we just heard there from Angela Knight, old friend of yours and colleague of yours, and Jasmine Birtles on the personal website, magpie.com, it's very real. Money Magpie, 46% of people tell the Daily Mail it is their overriding concern.
Yes. I mean, as to whether more can be done, of course, more can be done. I mean, you know, the COVID crisis proved that the government could come up with almost unlimited amounts of money, but of course, it all has to be paid back one day. And one of the things that's happening is that interest rates are rising, which means that the cost of paying it back is going up. Politically speaking, the Prime Minister would want to do more, and the Chancellor would think that his credibility was at stake. So the Chancellor would be very reluctant to do it. The Chancellor is very much weakened at the moment.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the last thing the Prime Minister wants is to lose his Chancellor, who, by the way, would be the second Chancellor he'd lost. So I think that's quite interesting to play it out. We're talking about the cost of living crisis. It just occurred to me that when I was in my 20s, we had 27% inflation. And that was not necessarily an election loser. Actually, Labour did lose the next election, but only just, and it wasn't entirely foreseeable. So what really matters, of course, is the standard of living. I mean, when I was in my 20s, inflation was a terrific thing for me. I took out a mortgage at the limit of what I could afford. A year later, it was easy for me to afford. You see, not only had prices gone up 27%, but my salary had gone up 27 or 29% or whatever. So it isn't just inflation. Voters will be suffering, certainly in the short term, until and unless their pay catches up. But it's quite interesting that our inflation is at the bottom end of inflation in the European countries.
Yeah.
And we're behind the United States as well. So, you know, part of what the government will say is that this is a global problem.
Yes.
They should be blushing a bit about how incompetent the Bank of England has been. I mean, we're now 5 percentage points adrift from the Bank of England's target for inflation. But I'm not yet sure that it's a killer for the government. And at every election, it's always the same thing. Whatever your woes are, you have to believe that the other lot will do you better.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think one of the other bits that I thoroughly recommend, as I often do, Robert Colville writing in the Sunday Times, it's a brilliant, brilliant piece. Luck is Johnson's greatest quality as a leader. It's not economic, it's not clashing with bishops, it's not strutting across the square in Keith. It's luck in events, in life, and in his enemies.
Yes, I mean, he has been incredibly lucky. I mean, if you think back to January, had he had that first fine back then, I don't think he'd be here now. Tory MPs, but at that stage, were so angry. The letters were certainly thumping in, going towards the margin of 54 needed for a confidence vote. And then, of course, the war came along. And now that Boris Johnson is able to argue that let's not change horses in midstream while you've got the crisis going. I was slightly swayed by that last week. I thought that was actually not a bad argument for not...
Oh, let me chip in, and then the both of you come back. You carry on your thought, and then Michael come in on it. Because oddly enough, I mean, I'm the first to be critical of the quality of opposition, whether it's from the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats, and I think a lot of it's been insipid. I thought Starmer actually struck a real blow when he said, that's nonsense, because we've made it perfectly clear in debate after debate in the House of Commons that we in the opposition stand four square behind Her Majesty's government in what it is doing to support the good people of Ukraine.
That's right.
I thought that was a Starmer point.
Yes, I think it was. I agree with you. But the whole thing is, I think that the attitude has changed since last Tuesday, since the fine came in. And the major point is that Britain actually isn't at war. We are dealing with a major crisis. Boris Johnson has done it quite well. It's very important we try and avoid World War III, which so far we appear to be doing. But I think that MPs now begin to feel, well, hang on, they've got loads of emails coming in from constituents. There's a very moving piece by Caroline Noakes, the former immigration minister, in The Observer, where she talks about a constituent complaining about Boris Johnson's behaviour because they buried their 3-year-old child who was terminally ill during lockdown, stuck to the rules all the way through, and we have a Prime Minister who didn't. So I think this comes back to bite him.
And let me just chip in. I mean, Noakes concludes that he should go, which was her position earlier on. She's also in that important camp, and there are quite a few of them, of people who were sacked by Boris Johnson, and it includes Andrew Mitchell.
Yes, I mean, Prime Ministers stack up enemies. There are those they've overlooked, and there are those that they've already dispensed with.
And they, being brutal, they don't matter if in the newspapers, they matter if they're still on the back benches and they're capable of writing letters to the chairman of the 1922 committee.
Let me go back to what you said, that his greatest quality was luck. Of course he has luck, and it's very important to be lucky. But what he has is this extraordinary charisma. I mean, he's an epic election winner. He's one of the finest politicians that I've seen in the years that I've been around. I mean, of course, I wouldn't compare him with Margaret Thatcher in terms of having a vision. I wouldn't compare him with Tony Blair in terms of transforming a party. But just the business of winning elections, you know, he won London twice. London is a Labour city, as we're about to find out in May. And he won London twice, and he won this epic majority of 80 seats. I mean, that's what the Tories have to remember. This man is a great election winner. So, of course, he's been lucky now that Rishi Sunak has faded away. Rishi Sunak is not going to be a Conservative leader. Liz Truss certainly isn't ready to be Conservative leader. I think the Conservatives will be absolutely mad to get rid of him. I also think he's been quite lucky, at least in the order in which these fines have come out. Because, I mean, you and I spent the lockdown in studios. We were still going into studios, and there were people to the right and the left of us. At any time, if one of those people had had a birthday, they would have turned up with a little box of cakes, and we would have eaten our cakes and we would have drunk our tea. We might still have had the perspex barriers between us, but that's what would have happened. That's what happened to him, as far as I can see from this first fine. They were all in the office together. They were all hugger-mugger anyway in their work. Someone turned up with a cake. For 10 minutes, they ate a piece of cake. I mean, this does not seem to
apparently didn't even eat it.
Well, apparently didn't even eat it. I mean, it doesn't seem to me... I perfectly understand the point about people who buried their relatives. I mean, that is terrible. I perfectly understand about people who couldn't go into hospital to be with their loved ones. But I don't think that eating a piece of cake with the people you spent all day in the office with is really such a breach.
But if you are breaking the rules that you've set down for the rest of the nation,
nobody even knew. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you, which I don't like doing. If
there were his rules, he'd imposed them on the rest of us, and you would have thought that he would have put more thought into the danger of breaking them himself. So at the moment, he accepts that 9 minutes at his birthday party was a breach of his own rules.
But ironically, when he went on camera, and I think it was Vicky Young from the BBC who did what we call the pool interview, it was one for everybody else, he almost articulated precisely what Michael just said. It simply didn't cross my mind in those circumstances that it was a breach.
Is that not worrying the Prime Minister who doesn't think?
It didn't cross your mind either, because it was reported in the Times in June 2000.
Yes, it was, yeah.
That he'd had a birthday party, and you didn't react, and nobody else reacted. And
the brilliant line of campaign by cake. What was the
ambush by cake?
Kidnapped by cake. Ambush by cake.
Yes.
Who was it who said that? Connor Burns.
Connor Burns, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, who's a very good wordsmith. Nobody jumped on it at the time. I mean, the poor man is now left. He's judged by the Metropolitan Police, one of the most incompetent organisations in the country. And, the Metropolitan Police might have decided that a birthday cake was a crime, and it might have decided the birthday cake wasn't a crime. I mean, it's completely arbitrary, isn't it?
Yes. Well, we had a barrister on who said what the Prime Minister should refuse to pay the fine and throw the gauntlet down to the Met and say, show me the evidence, prove it in court. A high-risk strategy, I think, but an interesting one
if he lost,
in terms of jurisprudence.
If he lost, he would get a criminal conviction, which he doesn't have at the moment.
And also, we're not talking about just one party. We are talking about 12 that happened in Downing Street. So it was something that kept happening. So at some point, would a Prime Minister not have thought, is this really such a terribly good idea?
That's why I said that he'd been lucky with the order in which the fines have come.
So as always, Colville is right. Luck. The other interesting thing that we always find, even at GBNews, where I like to believe, and you very often do presentation work here and are very familiar with how we operate, and that is open-mindedness and prepared to speak what to some other folk in the mainstream media, as it is called sometimes, it's the unspeakable. We get hammered for Boris bashing, and ordinary folk out there are still of the mind to give him a fair crack of the whip, let him get on with it, because, as Michael said, he is popular, he is charismatic, he is a leader, he does win elections, and the rest of it. But the thing that strikes me as being genuinely extraordinary, as an objective observer of these matters, we all knew the game was up with Gordon Brown because of his poll rating. Margaret Thatcher, the game was up when the cabinet turned against her. We all know that political history so clearly. I still cannot get my head round the fact that, given everything that the Observer and other papers have listed, that Keir Starmer is just held in the polls to be the best option for Prime Minister right now, and that Labour are just 2-3 percentage points above the Conservative Party. If there were an election tomorrow, the Labour Party would not have an overall workable majority. They'd have to cut a deal with somebody. I just find that extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to remember that the Labour do actually have a huge mountain to climb after 2019. So when you start...
But it's almost as if Boris Johnson and the media have created all the base camps between base camp 1 up to the peak of Everest, and put the crampons in and put the ropes there.
It would be higher, but I mean, the latest poll was talking about 800 losses at local elections.
Sure.
That still wouldn't give Keir Starmer an overall majority. Yeah. But that is because the mountain to climb is so high.
And one of the reasons the mountain is so high, by the way, is that Labour used to get 55 seats in Scotland, and it now gets between 0 and 1.
Yeah.
Makes it very, very difficult.
Does any of it, final point to you, and actually you come in on it as well, because I billed you right at the beginning of our conversation at noon as one of the most experienced hands in print. And so, as it were, between us, we've been there, done it, and seen it all. But you, first of all, have you ever seen a similar circumstance in your political life where a leader has apparently appeared done for, and yet for some reason nobody can deliver the coup de grace?
Well, it depends what your timescale is. I mean, Theresa May was very much in that circumstance. I mean, I couldn't believe how she staggered on And, she was rather ungallantly referred to as the walking dead at the time. That went on for a very long time. But I certainly don't think that is the case with Boris. I do not think he is walking dead. I personally have been very attracted by the way he's led us, and I think international opinion, through the Ukrainian crisis. I've been very attracted. I think it's played to his strengths, which are largely rhetorical, but he does it terribly well. I think he will win the next election. That's my view. It could easily be proved wrong, but I think he will win the next election if he's still there.
General election.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nigel?
Well, I don't think he'll still be there by the time of the next general election, but the key moment is, as Michael says, he is a vote winner. He's a great campaigner. I give him all those kind of things, and he's got huge strengths there. If it turns around that Tory MP sees a vote loser and we get a chance to find out on May the 5th, then I think he's toast.
Fascinating. Nigel and Michael, a real pleasure to have spent so much time with you this morning.
Happy Easter, Alistair.
And a happy Easter to you and to yours.
Indeed, and a happy
Look forward to
Easter.
seeing you again
Yeah.
very, very soon, I hope. Thank you very much indeed. Nigel Nelson there for the Mirror Group and Michael Portillo. Now, you're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. It is 25 minutes past 1, and we've plenty more still to come in the remaining half hour of the programme, including some further reflections on the role of Christian values and faith in politics. So, see you in a few moments.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 28 minutes past 1 and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Since the announcement that the United Kingdom will send asylum seekers to Rwanda for processing, it has been the subject of lively debate, even controversy. Today, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, waded in, taking aim at the plan. But how is it actually going to work, and what do the Rwandan authorities think about it? To discuss that, I'm delighted to be joined by the government spokesperson for Rwanda, Yolande Mokolo. And there she is. Yolande, thank you so much for joining us this Sunday afternoon. First of all, let's assume that these people, and it may be within a matter of weeks, months, arrive in your country to be processed. Who will represent them? Who will speak for them if they're not capable of making their own defence?
Thanks for having me on. When the migrants arrive in Rwanda, we will take responsibility for them. Rwanda is a signatory to the Refugee Convention, and we have an asylum process of our own. And we do have an immigration on immigration and migrant policy. So we will take responsibility for them. They will have access to legal services, and they will go through the process fairly. And if they're determined to be refugees, they will be offered not only safety, but the opportunity to live here with us and thrive.
What are that a brilliant answer, and thank you so much for that clarity. What are the criteria that your examiners will apply to determine whether or not they are genuine refugees fleeing a conflict zone in fear of their life, as opposed to simply somebody who perhaps wants a chance at a better economic life, what we call here economic migrants?
So our asylum process is in line with the Refugee Convention, and it's similar to the process in many other countries. So that's what we will use to determine whether they gain asylum or not. But it doesn't matter. For us, it doesn't matter whether they're asylum seekers or simply migrants looking for an opportunity, because we believe that in a fair world, people should be able to live with dignity and have access to opportunities wherever they are. So whether they're determined to be refugees or just economic migrants, they're welcome to stay with us if they want to.
Fascinating. I wasn't aware of that. If they fail, Yolande, that examination, as it were, and they don't meet either of those criteria to stay with you, either as economic migrants or as bona fide refugees, where will they go?
Well, it's not an examination as such. We are offering opportunity for people to live here with us. This is what the partnership is about. Whether they're refugees or migrants, they also have the option to return to their country of origin, and they will be facilitated to do that. Or they can move on to other receiving countries that are willing to take them.
OK. You will be well aware, because as the board behind you explains, you're a spokesperson for the government of Rwanda, and it's been all over the newspapers here, that both the United States State Department and the UK's own Foreign Office have been very critical of Rwanda within the last 12, 18 months of your government's record on human rights, not least lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans rights, and also on law and order. Do you dismiss those criticisms from the US State Department and the Foreign Office, or do you take them on board and say to us now live on television here in the UK, it's a work in progress?
I think every country is a work in progress. We have a very good relationship with the US and with the United Kingdom. We do great work together in development and in other areas. Where there are areas of disagreement, we discuss it. Rwanda has progressed tremendously in the last 28 years. This month, we're commemorating 28 years after the genocide of 1994. And this country has made progress on every single aspect, including on rights, on freedoms, on media. We're a safe country, we're stable, we are united, and we're growing economically very rapidly. So some of the reports do not correspond to reality, and both the United Kingdom and the US, who have representatives here in their embassies, are able to see this for themselves. Anyone who comes to Rwanda cannot fail to see with their own eyes the progress that this country has made.
Fascinating answer, because one of the specific issues that was raised in the US State Department criticism was, and I quote, the unjustified arrest or prosecution of journalists and of censorship, serious restrictions on internet freedoms. Because clearly you made those claims, Yolande, and I hear them loud and clear. Folk will want to come to Rwanda to see what it's like on the ground. You're saying right here, right now, that they will have total access, total freedom to operate as objective journalists as they would if they were here or in the United States of America.
Yes, please come and see for yourself.
I'll take you up on that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Really.
Final point. Can you give me an equally clear assertion, because many people here are gravely concerned about gay rights, gay lesbian rights, and it's been an issue in this country since the late 1960s. We've made slow and steady progress, but we now think in terms of gay rights and lesbian rights, we are in a much better place than we were 50 years ago. If I turned up and I were a gay man, or if somebody was applying to be considered an asylum seeker in Rwanda who was perhaps a lesbian, would you guarantee right here, right now, on UK television, that that would not be held against them?
Rwanda does not discriminate in law, in policy, or practice against sexual orientation. We do not criminalize homosexuality. And this is the last country to discriminate against people, because what led to the genocide in 1994 partly was discrimination against a particular group in this country. So we are the last country that will discriminate against anyone.
Final question, and it's a cheeky one, both for you but also for our Home Secretary, with whom you and your ministers have been working so closely. Priti Patel says that she thinks that this model may become a template for other countries. Has the government of Rwanda received any other applications, any other countries getting in touch with you saying we'd like to do business with you on the immigration question?
We've just signed, so let's see how it goes. We are determined to make this work, and we hope that other countries will follow suit, because migration should be looked at differently. People should be offered opportunities to live dignified lives wherever they are in the world, and we hope more countries will join up. Rwanda in 2019 was the first one to host refugees from migrants from Libya, endangered from Libya. We have over 700 of them who've passed through here that we offered sanctuary to, working with the UNHCR. So we hope that this new innovative model will also be emulated by other countries. Then we can do more together.
Yolande Makola, a genuine pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for fitting us into what I know is a busy schedule for you this Sunday. Thank you very much indeed. I look forward to seeing you in Rwanda. Thank you.
Please come. You're welcome.
That's Yolande Makola there, the spokesperson of the Rwanda government. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and it is just coming up to 1:45. Still to come, your thoughts on the issues that we've been discussing today, plus some Easter Sunday reflections with a dear friend of mine, journalist and now Anglican priest, George Pitcher. But first, let's bring you up to date with the latest news Israel.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 7 minutes past 1. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Archbishop of York has joined the Archbishop of Canterbury in criticising the government's plans to send migrants to Rwanda. In his Easter sermon at Canterbury Cathedral, Justin Welby said the plans are the opposite of the nature of God. Similarly, at York Minster, Stephen Cottrell said he found the deal depressing and distressing. The government says it will stem the flow of migrants crossing the Channel. Boris Johnson has paid tribute to Christians in Ukraine during his Easter Sunday address. His comments come as the Ministry of Defence said that Russia's ultimate objective remains the same, despite shifting its operational focus to eastern Ukraine. Speaking partly in Ukrainian, Mr. Johnson urged those in the country to be strong and have courage in your heart.
Those around the world facing fear of persecution, forced to celebrate their Saviour's rebirth in secret, and of course, the Christians of Ukraine, whether they're marking Easter today or its Orthodox equivalent later this month, for whom Christ's message of hope, the triumph of life over death and good over evil, will resonate this year perhaps more than any other. Будьте сильні і майте в серці odvahu. Всі, хто вповається на Господа.
Now, a warning, the following clip does contain flashing images. 2 people have died and at least 11 people have been injured after being shot at a party in the United States. Authorities in the city of Pittsburgh say the shooting happened shortly after midnight at a rental property where nearly 200 people had gathered for a large party. Investigations are ongoing. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and Friends.
Coming up today at 6 p.m.
Welcome to a very special GB News Easter programme. We are invited during this short time to enter into the passion, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's an invitation to take part in the most important part of the Christian life. Happy Easter. Alleluia.
The Meaning of Easter with Calvin Robinson today at 6 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is, what is it? It's 1:41, which is sort of just about 22, really. And you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. Thank you very much indeed for so doing. We've been talking about Rwanda. We've been talking about Boris Johnson and Ukraine. And we asked for your thoughts and comments, so let's take a few of them. I'm going to start with Karen, if I may, who got in touch via email. I think Justin Welby is wrong, but it doesn't matter. It's not his place to comment on political matters. He should stick to the job that he's paid to do. He is abusing his position. To just point out, Karen, lots of other people say it's exactly what his position is to make such comments, but we share all thoughts here. Rob joins the conversation via Twitter. The intellectual arrogance of the Archbishop, who presumes to know the nature of God. Martin also via Twitter. Surely it isn't unwarranted for religious leaders to object to government becoming people traffickers. That's Martin's view. And I said the comment that Karen made is not shared by everybody, but there we are. Martin thinks it's not unwarranted. And finally, a quick thought from Greg on Twitter. Greg says, send migrants back from whence they came, or the first safe country that they travelled through, pending the outcome of their asylum claim. I assume you mean, Greg, their asylum claim here, because that was very similar to one of the points that Michael Portillo made in the comment. The first safe country that they travelled through, and clearly it is not the United Kingdom. So thank you very much indeed for all of those thoughts. As you well know, today is Easter Sunday. And so what better day to reflect upon the place that faith and even Christian morals have in politics and in broader society. Calvin's got a brilliant programme coming up at 6 o'clock that you won't want to miss. But I wanted to have my two penneth as well with a very good friend of mine and a man whose views I greatly experience. He is the former journalist, used to be the business editor of the Observer newspaper, an author and now an Anglican priest. George Pitcher, I'm delighted to say, joins me now. And it genuinely is very good to see you, and thank you for agreeing to break into your busy working day, as it were. I don't want to overdwell on Welby and Rwanda, but I just want to ask you two specific questions on that, if I may, George. First of all, do you think that Justin Welby is right on the theology of Rwanda?
Well, Alistair, I have to catch up. I've been delivering my own sermons this morning and indeed our own worship for Easter Sunday. But I've been listening to your reports and I think uncharacteristically, I find myself with my archbishops this morning in feeling more than uneasy, indeed critical, of the government policy that's been introduced this morning. And I do think, speaking for myself, and I haven't yet had a chance to read in detail the Archbishop's sermons this morning, but before myself, I think I'm most deeply uncomfortable with the idea that we can push immigration and asylum claims away from our own country as if it's something that needs to happen elsewhere. I think we need to take responsibility for our own asylum claims, and I think we need to take responsibility for refugees that are trying to reach our country. That's not to say that we shouldn't process them critically, that we shouldn't have strict security arrangements in place. But I think to try and push it away somewhere else, to pretend that we can push it away to another country so that it becomes somebody else's problem, is a dreadful kind of inversion of what our Saviour Jesus Christ says with regard to, if you're not welcomed where you take the gospel, then shake the dust from your heels. What we seem to be insisting is that other people's dust is shaken from their heels in another country. Now, I was listening to the lady that you were interviewing earlier on behalf of Rwanda, and Rwanda sounds like it's perfectly capable of doing so, but I would really rather more welcome the idea of a country in which we are the established Church of England, remember, looking with open hearts and open minds at welcoming those refugees that we, and especially from Ukraine, of course, those refugees that we can handle, processing that properly. But it seems to me that what we haven't done is come up with a system with our European partners of processing things properly so that we can play our own role rightly with other European countries in trying to solve the grievous issues that are facing us.
Absolutely fascinating, and I didn't interrupt because I wanted to hear every word, jot and comma of it, George. Thank you for that. More broadly, and I said it twice now, when we first met, you were the business editor of the Observer newspaper at a time when some of our politicians were less than pure as the driven snow, and certainly many of our business leaders didn't quite reach muster. As you reflect upon those life experiences at Easter, do you think that your parishioners, that ordinary folk out there, want leaders both in the church and in business and in politics who take the moral high ground, who adopt belief, who adopt morality?
Well, yes, in the broadest sense, Alistair. I'm not sure that we do occupy the moral high ground, actually. I think I just want to put a little coda in there because I think for a variety of reasons we don't want to necessarily go into this afternoon, only because they're irrelevant, I think, to the discussion that we're having. But I'm not sure that the church is well placed to occupy the high moral ground at the moment. We are, however, well placed to point, as I believe the Archbishop of Canterbury is doing today, towards the Easter story, towards the way in which God breaks into the world, to ask, what does that teach us? And I was listening to your emails that you read out a moment ago, and there was somebody there that was expressing a view that really quite regularly crops up, that that archbishops and bishops and indeed clergy like me should butt out of politics, should not get involved in politics. And I think that is wrong, if I may say so. our Easter story starts at the beginning of Holy Week, really, with the arrival of Jesus in Jerusalem, with the crowd shouting, "Hosanna in the highest, Son of the King and Son of David," and so on, greeting their Messiah for the salvation of his people. Now, Jesus is riding in to fulfill the prophecy on the back of a mule to Jerusalem, into the belly of the beast, where the Roman and Jewish powers prevail. All the secular and worldly power is contained within Jerusalem. Now, if that isn't the most profoundly political act, I don't know what is. Politics is only the question of how we equitably and decently deal as a civilized society with our neighbours and the people around us. Now, that's something that the church should be intimately involved in.
I absolutely agree, and also we know as well from our readings of the scripture that we knew what Jesus's view was on the moneylenders and dealt appropriately and accordingly with them. Have we lost George, or have we just lost the picture? We're just going to see if we can reconnect with George. There he is.
Oh, hello.
Hi, George. Sorry, we lost you for a moment. Don't worry, hang on in there. I was just saying, we also know what Jesus' view was on the moneylenders. But coming away from Rwanda and from government, when you look at a story like the P&O Ferry story, where there is a leader of a major public company who tells MPs, "I knew I was breaking the law, I knew I was dumping men and women whose livelihood and whose families' livelihood depend upon that job, so I could get some cheaper labour from abroad." That's a moral issue, George. That is a moral issue. It's not just about commerce.
I agree with you, and it's a view on which we should be speaking from the pulpits and from the public square as church people, as disciples of the living Christ in the world. And I absolutely believe that that's a territory in which we should stand in the corner with the marginalised, the oppressed, those whose livelihoods are being deprived from them. Today at church, Alistair, I wondered whether I was going to talk about Mary Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles, encountering the risen Christ, what it meant to encounter the risen Christ on Easter morning, on that first Easter morning. But, you know, I abandoned all that, and I thought that I'd talk for a bit about the stone, if I may say so, the stone that is rolled aside from the tomb. And what I meant by that, really, was the metaphor that we all have, one way or another, as human beings, stones to roll away from our heart, so that we can let God's love flow into the world and through us, so we can express our love. And I do think, specifically on the P&O Ferries thing, that when we start treating people like commodities, when we start thinking that profit, our shareholders are everything, despite the other people to whom we have a responsibility, such as our staff, those who work for our company, then really we should be thinking, should I be rolling away the stone from my heart so that the love of God, so that the light of the love of God can shine into it and out of it to other people? So, you know, I think Easter morning is a time when we can start saying to all kinds of people, industrialists like the ones that you refer to, politicians, those who write and devise and develop our public policy, roll away the stone. Who is it that we need to help most? Who is it that we need to show love to? Even if you don't believe in God, you believe in love. Who should you be showing it to? What is the cold stone that we have in front of our heart that needs to be rolled away?
Final point is this, and I think it was Luciana Berger, who you know, former Labour MP and a Jewish woman, who said Easter is extraordinary in another way, and that is that it is a great celebration and a great festival of belief and renewal, as you've just described, for Christians, but as it is for Jews and for Muslims, it is the Abrahamic tradition. All three of those great faiths celebrate at this time. It's not a catch question, it's a genuine one. Welby only talks about Christianity because he's the leader of the Anglican Church. but he talks about Christian values being applied to immigration. It's broader than that, isn't it? It's the values of humanity and faith.
I think that's right. Yeah. I think that I'm, in a sense, because I'm ordained as a priest in the Church of England, in a way I'm only entitled to speak on behalf of my church or to my congregation or to those who choose to listen to me, whether they're of my faith or of another faith. And I think probably he, that is Archbishop Welby, is speaking that this is a Christian responsibility, because I really wouldn't trespass into the territory of other faith leaders, because that would be impertinent and rather disrespectful, really. I shouldn't be sitting here or standing here in a pulpit saying all people of faith must think like this or must recognize what the imperatives are for us, because I'm not entitled to speak on behalf of imams or rabbis or people of other faith. But we are, you're absolutely right, Alistair, all in the same game together, and particularly those of us of an Abrahamic faith who are monotheists, who believe in a single God. It's our duty and our privilege and our joy at Passover and in Ramadan and at Easter to join together to say there is something much bigger than us going on in the world, and perhaps it's a time to listen to that much bigger thing that's going on, rather than get tied up with those small resentments and jealousies that can often preoccupy us. Let's look at the bigger picture is what I'm saying, and happy Easter, Alistair, and alleluia, he is risen.
Bless you, George. A real pleasure to talk to you, and no better way of ending our programme. Take care, God bless, and I'll see you soon, I hope. Thank you very much
indeed.
indeed.
Bless you, happy Easter.
The Reverend George Pitcher. That is all that we have time for today. I hope you agree with me. That was a fine way to end. I will be back next weekend, 12 till 2, Saturday and Sunday. Until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend. And as George just said, a very happy Easter to you. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for much of the country, but rain will continue in the far west. Let's take a look at the details. Across southwest England, most places will remain dry this afternoon, though rain will move into western Cornwall, feeling warm in the sun with highs of 16 Celsius, 61 Fahrenheit. The sunshine will turn increasingly hazy for southeast England, but it will be dry and warm with light southerly winds, temperatures reaching 18 degrees. Turning cloudy for Western Wales with a few splashes of rain possible. Dry and bright elsewhere with some sunshine. Temperatures will reach 17 Celsius. The Midlands will stay dry with plenty of sunshine, and also northwest England too. The sun may become hazy later, but temperatures will approach 20 Celsius, well above average for the time of year. Northeast England will also be dry and warm with lots of hazy sunshine. However, it will be a little bit fresher along the coast, with temperatures lower here compared to inland areas. Outbreaks of patchy rain will affect the Western Isles and parts of the Highlands through this afternoon, but elsewhere across Scotland there'll be plenty of dry, bright and warm weather. Northern Ireland will stay cloudy this afternoon with further outbreaks of rain, the rain turning heavy at times too, feeling fresher across the country with temperatures in low double figures. Rain will remain across the far west this evening, whilst the rest of the UK will be fine and dry, and that's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the